Hello, my name is Professor John Benjamin. This is West Virginia Wesleyan College, and today we'll be talking about the second half of the web design process, steps 4 through 6. So our objectives are to complete step 4, that's to specify the website's navigation system, then design the look and feel of the website, and finally setting up a testing, publishing, and maintenance schedule. So when we are getting ready to build the website, so remember we've done all of the work, we've done all of our research, we've done all of our planning, and now we're getting down a little bit closer and actually designing the look of it. One of the things we want to be concerned about, even before we get to the mock-up on the wireframes, is how to utilize the initial visible screen area, how to maximize that without making it cluttered. And so one of the things that you want to be aware of is that above and to the left are where we want to put the really important information, and because that stays out of what's called the scroll zones. So for instance here, with this del, so we've got the logo and the nav is hugging or flush to the left. And so that way, if this website collapses, all of that critical information is still going to be there. And so that's one of the first things that we want to sort of be mindful of. Another thing to consider is things like card layouts and carousels. How can we add more information to this very small area that is going to be the initial viewing area of the website? So before, we don't want to have any critical information that we have to scroll to. The really critical information we want to show straight away. And so we can use cards like this, slideshows, and carousels to add more information. Although a lot of experts are saying that the trends are falling out of favor for those. And so really what the trends are now is you want to have just everything in a static image if possible. But carousels are still popular and are good to use. And so a lot of this is based on eye tracking studies using heat maps. And so heat maps are created by analyzing visitors' eye movements. And what we notice is as people read the internet in what's called an F pattern. And this is again getting back to the scannability of your website. So they're looking for chunks of information, headings, and images, and then so they see that and then they read to the right and then they go down. And then they see another headline and again read to the right and sort of scan down. And this is what's known as an F pattern, and that's how we want to sort of be mindful about designing our website to fit that. So there are 3 approaches to considering how you decide the width of your page, although there are fixed width or pixel width pages, and there's liquid or flexible page layouts. But really the best practices are really just to do the hybrid page layout, and that's with RWD principles, where certain parts of the image, let's say frames or containers or images, may stay the same, may have specifically designed pixels, and then those will collapse or change size based on media queries. All right, so then once we have all of those things, we're ready to start thinking about our website's navigation system. Now again, for our projects, we have very simple navs. We don't have that many pages. So this will be a smaller portion of your process documents. But for larger, complicated websites, this is extremely critical. So you have to really put a lot of time and effort into how you're going to structure your navigation. And so there's really 2 main approaches that you want to consider that are best for your user, a user-based navigation or a user-controlled navigation. And the user-based is simply a navigation system where you're really considering the user experience principles and you're considering all of your demographics and your target audience information, and then you're designing a navigation system to really suit to make the easiest direct pathways for your user. But there's really only one set system that you're creating for them. Whereas the user-controlled navigation system, where you can have several different ways, you're kind of giving your user more choice, like different ways that they might navigate through search bars, through the footer, through a left-hand nav versus a drop-down main nav. So it's a little bit more flexible. And keep in mind the needs of touchscreen users. Again, remember always mobile first. So a lot of navigation systems, if they don't work well with touchscreens, then you want to avoid them. So there's different types of links. There are text links, hidden links, image links, related link groups, and breadcrumb trails, which are not really that common nowadays. The WAI Web Accessibility Initiative, essentially what you want to do here is wherever you create a link, you want to create a title or identify the target clearly, so that way when you scroll over it, the user knows where there's information that tells them where that link is going to go. Color alone isn't really enough for an indicator link. You might have color and bold or underline or rollovers, things like that. So again, user base versus user control. The user base is based on their needs, and rather than the publisher's needs. But when we're talking about the user's needs, we are designing a one navigation system for the easiest user experience. And again, user controlled allows visitors to move around really in a manner that they choose. When we're creating text links, you just want to really, again, clearly identify the target, use a tooltip or a title, use existing text flow, avoid phrases such as click here, include formatting and color, that's really important, and use color to indicate if the link has been followed. So if you've already clicked on a link, it should change color. So here's an example of just a link that's just a color, and it doesn't have enough signal really to it. The user might just simply think that that's just colored text. Although if you're consistently using that color, then they will see the pattern or the trend. Hidden links are things like the hamburger. Most users are familiar with the hamburger or toggler, but there are some users that are unfamiliar with it. So it's good to think, especially if a lot of your users are of a certain age group. There are image links. You can use images or icons to create a link. Again, you just want to make sure that it's clearly indicated that your user understands that that's a button or a link. Hotspots are just areas of images that are hyperlinked. There's different navigation areas, so menus. You can have a pop-out menu, which is very common, especially if you have a lot of information. Drop-down menus are really common, and tab menus. So let's take a look at all three of these. And so here's a pop-out menu. For the Hello website, when you roll over the H here, this whole area pops out. And so in this case, there's not that much information, but it was a choice that they made to keep the loading screen really simple. I'm here at GameStop. This is a navigation bar with a drop-down menu. Again, they can be very complicated. It's almost like a separate page within the drop-down menu. And here is a tabbed with drop-down menu. So as you scroll over each of these, a whole series of more links and information changes, almost like a scrolling slideshow, if you will. And then there's breadcrumb trails, which aren't really used too often, but they can be really handy to keep users from being lost. A search is a capability that's a type of navigation. So if I go to a website or you go to a website and the navigation doesn't really tell you the specific place that you want to go, you might go right to the search tool. And so that's really important to have for most websites. And then there's levels of navigation. So there's the primary. That's the overview of the whole website. That's your main nav typically. And then there's subsidiary. So that's within an area of the website. So it may not be in the main nav. And then there's contextual. Specific areas, just very specific content areas have links in it that go to other places. And then there's adaptive. So that's links that change based on a visitor's history. So that's not quite as common, but the first three are very common, and you want to be mindful about that. So here are the levels of navigation, and this fit for you example is going to be very similar to how the examples that you're going to get for step 4 in your web design process, because again, we're creating pretty simple websites. So you're going to simply list out a top navigation, maybe if you choose to have a left or side nav menu, maybe a menu in the footer, formatted text links, obviously, and search capability, although we may not have that for our purposes. All right, so now we're finally get to step 5. There is a lot of work. The bulk of the work is really steps 1 through 4 before we get to step 5. We can't start in step 5 too early. We've got to have all of this knowledge. We've got to have all this fleshed out. And so now it's time to start looking at how the web design is going to actually look. So one of the most important things in a website is visual consistency. They need to know they're there and they're staying in the same place. And so you want all of your typefaces to be consistent, the position of your content, so how you use the grid, where the logo is, all of these things should be consistent. The color scheme, obviously, you want to pick like 2 to 3 colors and then just constantly reuse those. And then you get, like I just mentioned, the placement of the name, logo, and the nav should be consistent as well. So here's a great example of visual consistency. Again, the nav bar on the home page for Orange Leaf versus the sub pages is the same. Color system is the same. The use of button tabs is the same. All really beautifully and well organized and very visually consistent. Trying to use color for visual contrast. So how can we direct our users through a page based on color? So remember, color has contrasts, so it can help focus. Remember, in the color wheel, colors on the opposite end of the color wheel will help other colors pop, and so they can drive people in a certain direction using contrast. Use your color scheme for the background colors and the graphics and the illustrations. So you don't want in your photography. You want all of that to be visually consistent. Choose background and text colors that provide sufficient contrast so it's easy to read the text. And again, and avoid using more than 2 to 3 contrasting colors. Here's an example of a dark themed website, Ever and Ever. So remember, when we're choosing colors, colors can evoke mood. And it can also stimulate interest, again, by creating contrast. And it needs to support the website's purpose. So what are the audience's expectations? What do they expect about the sole purpose of this website? Is it dark and mysterious? Is it light and fun? Is it muted and reserved? Or is it very vibrant and outgoing? All those things are dependent on color. So to keep things visually consistent and to help you choose really good color, here are some color tools: color.adobe, Pantone/color finder, HTML color codes. All of these tools will help you to make good color choices. Of course, CSS and formatting. So cascading style sheets are going to help you to keep those color codes consistent. It's good to have them mapped out. You can have them written down so you can easily access as you're coding them. Applying them to your properties and selectors. We've talked about CSS inline styles, internal styles, and then of course the external style sheet. So typically, almost always, you want everything to be in the external style sheet. Inline styles and even internal styles are only for very, very specific cases, because what they'll do is they'll break that consistency. So next, we want to think about how the main content of each of our pages is going to lay out before we start putting it all together into graphics. And that's called wireframing. And so here's 2 free tools, framebox.org and mockflow.com. And you can see here, we want to just make decisions about the structure of the page before we start adding structural elements. How big do we want the header to be? Where's the toggler going to go? Where's the main body content going to go? How is the desktop page going to be arranged versus the smartphone page? And so that's called a wireframe. And so this typically has to be approved by your client before you even move forward. And then once you have that approval, then you go ahead and you create the mockups. And you can create mockups in Photoshop. That's been the traditional way. InDesign also is a great tool for mockups because it specializes in typography and frames. And then a newer tool is Adobe XD, where you can create an actual interactive website using Adobe XD. But what here we're going to do now is we're not going to code anything. We know the structure, we know our colors, we pick them, we know our fonts, and we probably have some photography selected out, although some of it could be placeholders. And we're going to start to arrange that into single files that may or may not be interactive, probably not unless you're using Adobe XD. And so that way you can send these images to your client. A lot of times we send them to them on a screen, so we might have a little fake web page where you click on just a static image and it takes you to the next page, so they get a sense of what it would look like in a browser. But they're just static pages created in Photoshop that just look like what the web page is going to look like. And this is really critical. You have to have this approved by your client before you start moving forward, because the coding is so complicated. It's so hard. You want to fail small and early now. So you need approval for these mock-ups. And then now that you've got all your colors and everything, then you can go start building. And then when you show your client the website, they already know, they've already approved the look. All right, and so then you build it. And then, so that's really, should be a step here, but actually building and coding your website is really, I guess you might say, part of step 5. So that's where you actually go in there and build the thing. And then that brings us to step 6. Or once it's built, you have to test it. And then you have to set parameters for when and how you're going to publish it. And then finally, and really important, you have to come up with a system or a schedule or a plan for how you're going to maintain the website. All right, so testing. A formal website usability test is an evaluation that generally takes place in a structured environment, such as a testing laboratory. And so you have a whole bunch of computers and devices set up, and then you have professionals or specifically chosen people to go in and conduct testing, where you collect feedback, you find all these things that are broken and whatnot. So you need to find a lot of things too. You have to decide on your hosting service and how frequently you're going to update it, who's the person in charge of doing the updates, and do you have any budget restrictions. And then when you're publishing, you have to make that decision, like who's going to publish it. For the most smaller websites, it's not really too big of a decision. Your client already might have a hosting service that they use. But for larger ones, you have to really go and do your research and find out, like if it's Chase Bank, is this service provide all the needs? Can it handle what we're aiming to do? And again, are there any size limitations? So again, you have to answer these questions for the maintenance plan. How often will you update the content? Who will update the content? What's the budget restrictions? Who will monitor your website, determine if there's any changes, if anything needs to be made? And then who will periodically go ahead and review the content and freshen it up? And so here is just a really basic, again, we're using the Fit For You example of how to fill out the step 6. And so usability testing, it might be really small. Typically, you have a testing lab if you're a web design company, or you might hire out a testing lab, like a consulting group that has a lab that you use. Or again, in small scale instances, you might just ask friends or family, or in this case, 2 employees, 2 trainers from Fit For You, and then 2 long-term clients. So you want a variety of people that might give you better feedback on different aspects of your website. And then publishing and maintaining. So the website would be hosted by an external web hosting company. You would define that. In our case, it's 000. Website content updates include blog posts, weekly sales and coupons, maintaining the product catalog by using the database. And so those, we'll keep it pretty simple. And then here's your site plan checklist. So there are 6 steps that we underwent, and you want to just kind of go back and make sure everything has been really addressed to the fullest extent. So again, remember, identifying the website's purpose and the target audience, determining the general content comes next. Then you select the structure, how it's all going to be laid out. Then the navigation system. I mean, you can't decide on how the navigation system is going to work unless you know what pages you're going to have. And then you design the look and feel of the website, and then of course build it. And then finally do a test, then you publish it, and then do your maintenance. All right, thanks. See you next time.